We are back with our read-through of the Vue.js docs, the brand new ones. Last time we read about composables, and next chapter is about custom directives. To be honest, I know nothing about custom directives, so I am really curious. Let's see. This chapter is not too long. Let's get started. Custom directives. In addition to the default set of directives shipped in core, like vModel or vShow, Vue also allows you to register your own custom directives. We have introduced two forms of code reuse in Vue, components and composables. Those two we have seen already. Components are the main building blocks, while composables are focused on reusing stateful logic. Custom directives, on the other hand, are mainly intended for reusing logic that involves low-level DOM access on plain elements. A custom directive is defined as an object containing lifecycle hooks similar to those of a component. The hooks receive the elements the directive is bound to. Here is an example of a directive that focuses on input when the element is inserted into the DOM by Vue. Inside our script setup, we define a constant vFocus, which is equal to an object with a mounted key, which is equal to a function which takes an element as input and returns the focused element. And then in the template, we can use vFocus. This is really straightforward. This is very easy. So if I reload the page again, we see that this element is automatically focused. This is really simple. I didn't know it was so simple. So I'm gonna guess this becomes automatically a custom directive because it starts with V and then another word in camel case. Let's read through. Assuming you haven't clicked elsewhere on the page, the input above should be auto-focused. This directive is more useful than the autofocus attribute because it works not just on page load. It also works when the element is dynamically inserted by Vue. In script setup, any camel case variable that starts with a V prefix can be used as a custom directive. In the example above, vFocus can be used in the template as vFocus. I did not know this. I definitely did not know this. If not using script setup, custom directives can be registered using the directives option. Sure. It is also common to globally register custom directives at the app level. So we create our app and we use the app.directive function, and inside we register globally our directive. This is very interesting. Custom directives should only be used when the desired functionality can only be achieved via direct DOM manipulation. Prefer declarative templating using built-in directives such as vbind when possible, because they are more efficient and server rendering friendly. So, because we have seen that a custom directive, the hooks take the element as argument, that's the actual DOM element that we can access to when the component has been mounted. So that makes sense that we try to do this in the mounted hook. I'm not sure if we can use other hooks, but I guess we'll see later. Well, if I don't say that before. A directive definition object can provide several hook functions, all optional. We have my dir object, and then inside we have all these hooks. Created, which is called before bound elements attributes, or event listeners are applied, which has arguments L as an element binding vnode and pref vnode. Then we have before mount, which is called right before the element is inserted into the DOM, of course, so before mount. Then we have mounted, which is called when the bound element's parent component and all its children are mounted. Then before update, called before the parent component is updated. Then we have updated, called after the parent component and all of its children have updated. And then before unmount, called before the parent component is unmounted, and unmounted called when the parent component is unmounted, of course. Hook arguments. Then directive hooks are passed these arguments. L, the element the directive is bound to. This can be used to directly manipulate the DOM. Binding, an object containing the following properties: value, all value arg v my directive, modifiers, v my directive full bar, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's go one by one. Value, the value passed to the directive. For example, in v my directive equal 1 plus 1, the value would be 2. The all value, the previous value only available in before update and updated. It is available whether or not the value has changed. Arg, the argument passed to the directive, if any. For example, in v my directive foo, the arg would be foo. The argument, clear. Modifiers, an object containing modifier, and if any. For example, these two, then we get an object foo true bar 2. Makes sense. Instance, the instance of the component where the directive is used, and there the directive definition object. All right. vnode, the underlying vnode representing the bound element. And vnode means virtual node. Pref node, the vnode representing the bound element from the previous render, only available in the before update and updated hooks. As an example, consider the following directive usage. We have a div with a v example with an argument foo with a modifier bar with a value bus. And we have arg foo, modifiers bar true, value bus, all value whatever it was before. Similar, well, the value is not bus because this is a variable. The value is the value of this variable, of course. Similar to built-in directives, custom directive arguments can be dynamic. For example, we have seen this before. Here the directive argument will be reactively updated based on arg property in our component state. Apart from L, you should treat these arguments as read-only and never modify them. If you need to share information across hooks, it is recommended to do so through elements dataset. Which is what? Wow, what is this thing? Yes, sure. The DOM element dataset property. Yes. Well, if you don't know what it is, you can Google about that. Let's see. MDN is not really good at providing examples, I think. We can have an element with a data ID and a value, data user, or data like data whatever, data dash and then a name and then optionally a value. And then we can access these values like that. In JavaScript, we get the element from the document with JavaScript, and then this element has the data values that we have passed in here we can access them like this. All right. Having said that, let's continue. So if we want to share information across hooks, it's better to use dataset, the elements dataset. Fair enough. Function shorthand. It's common for a custom directive to have the same behavior for mounted and updated, with no need for the other hooks. In such cases, we can define the directive as a function. We have a vColor with value color, and then the app directive is named color, and the color would be this thing. And then we have L and binding as arguments of this function, and it says this will be called for both mounted and updated, and we do here whatever. So if we pass here a function instead of an object with hooks as keys, and it automatically runs this function for both mounted and updated. All right, object literals. If your directive needs multiple values, you can also pass in a JavaScript object literal. Remember, directives can take any valid JavaScript expression. So we can pass this to vdemo, and then we have our directive, which has a handler function, which will run on update and mounted hooks, with an L and the binding. That's the DOM element, so this div, and that's the binding, so that's information bound to that's data bound to the directive. And inside this binding, there is a value, and the value is this thing. And we can access the color and the text. Fair enough. Usage on components. When used on components, custom directives will always apply to a component's root node, similar to fall-through attributes. Clear. If we apply a custom directive to a component, it will fall through and be applied to the root here. Note that components can potentially have more than one root node. When applied to a multi-root component, a directive will be ignored and a warning will be thrown. Unlike attributes, directives can't be passed to a different element with bind attrs. In general, it is not recommended to use custom directives on components. All right. Well, nice, good information. That's really easy to use then, these directives. We only need to do this. That's really easy. All right, next is gonna be plugins, but a little break first.